You have new messages.
Hey, what's going on, Alec? It's Rob. Hope you're doing alright, man. Call me when you get back from wherever you are.
Hey Alec, it's been 2 years since our Super Mario Bros. 3 race. You're not scared of losing again, are you? I mean, come on, fourth time's the charm, right? Nah, I'm sure you know. Anyways, just get back to me when you want to do that race.
Hey Alec, Ron here. Want to race in Mega Man X2 sometime? Or are you still sulking over losing in Mega Man X4?
Hey Alec, it's Goldie. Congratulations on 150 reviews. I just want to know, are you going to review Mega Man Soccer for the milestone video?
Hey Alec, it's Red Shy Guy. Listen, I heard about what you said for Sonic CD's US soundtrack being good, and I'm here to tell you why you're wrong. Oh crap, I'm almost out of minutes. Never mind.
Hello, side questing gentlemen. 'Tis I, the fetch questing gentleman. I would like to congratulate you on 150 reviews. But of course we all know they're all terrible.
Hey Alec, PK in the Universe here. Congrats on reaching a whole whopping 150 reviews. And rumor is, you're crossing into the multiverse. Be very careful, because as someone who's acquainted with this universe, it's dangerous enough as it is. Just imagine more dangerous variations of this already hectic universe. Anyways, Alec, stay awesome in this universe. Later.
Good day, everyone. Alec Elger, the Psyquestian gentleman, at your service, reviewing games both good and bad, old and new, and whatever's in between. I'm stuck in this safe house playing the only game left behind by my now deceased counterparts. Yeah, and that'd be Mega Man and Bass Challenger from the future for the WonderSwan handheld. As to why that's the only game he left behind, I don't know, but that's all we got. So while the world is ending outside, there's not a whole lot I can do other than review this game. Oh, and did I mention this is the 150th review special? Oh, great. I suppose this is the part where I get all sentimental about how long I've been running this channel, and I'm finally at the 150 review mark. I'd probably write something pretentious like 150 review videos out, over thousands and thousands of pages typed, and over 2,900 subscribers as of writing, in kind of a humble brag anecdote to give off a false sense of modesty. Well, I'm here to say that doesn't matter. It's a great milestone, don't get me wrong, but I've done all that before with the Super Mario Bros. 3 review video, so I don't need to do it all over again, as that would be artistically disingenuous, if not also repetitive. But I suppose it's a great way to end off on the Mega Man Handheld retrospective, which originally was meant to end off with Mega Man 5 Game Boy, and then I moved it to Game Gear, and then I decided to extend it even further to Mega Man and Bass for the WonderSwan. You know why? Because I have self-destructive tendencies and decided I haven't punished myself enough for fame and fortune. Which I have neither of yet, but I can keep trying as long as no one gets hurt in the process. Well, except for him, but he had it coming. So, Mega Man and Bass Challenger from the Future is a title only hardcore Mega Man fans seem to be aware of, but I've honestly been a Mega Man fan for 10 years now, and I only recently found out that this game exists, that there's actually a sequel of sorts to Mega Man and Bass for the Super Famicom, and this one is exclusively on the Bandai WonderSwan handheld that came out in 1999. Well, it was exclusive to the WonderSwan in the most legal way possible, but in the legally ambiguous sense, any jackass with a low-end laptop can play it.
Did I hear you right? Did I hear you saying that you're gonna make a copy of a game without paying?
Oh, no, not again. We're not doing this. So some of you may ask, what the hell is a WonderSwan? Well, it's definitely not Wonder Woman's forgotten animal sidekick or anything like that. But the reason why it's not widely known is because it was a Japanese-only 16-bit handheld, originally with a black and white display of 244 by 154 pixels, but was later released with a better LCD screen as well as a color model. And get this, it was made by no other than Nintendo legend Gunpei Yokoi, creator of the beloved Game Boy, but also the more infamous Virtual Boy. After leaving Nintendo in 1996 alongside a few of his associates, they formed their own company called Koto, and they worked on the Bandai WonderSwan, which was released in 1998. But unfortunately, Gunpei would not live to see its release because he was killed by a passing driver in 1997. It's especially tragic given how this was his way of starting over after leaving a company he's contributed to for over 30 years. And with it eventually going head-to-head against Nintendo's competitive doomsday machine that is the Game Boy Advance, it really doesn't surprise me that it flopped. I'm not saying it's a bad handheld at all, no, quite the opposite. It has quite the cult following for a reason, and a pretty decent niche library of video games like Klonoa Moonlight Museum, but 3.5 million units is a sales flop, even for a B-list handheld. Hell, the Game Gear at least saw the double digits with their sales, provided they did see life outside of Japan. But for its 4-year run, the WonderSwan did give it its all, even though it's pretty pointless for them to upgrade to color if the original model didn't even have its leg in the mass market yet. Given it was only released in Japan, perhaps it was never meant to sell as much as worldwide sales of the Game Boy, and can only base its success on Japan's population density of the time instead, which was 127 million in 2003 when the WonderSwan was finally discontinued, only gaining a measly 8% of Japan's market share. And here's where Mega Man comes into the WonderSwan picture. Capcom licensed out Mega Man to Bandai, and so we get this weird-ass entry that feels like a homebrew game featuring Mega Man characters. Hell, even the title Mega Man and Bass Challenger from the Future is really bizarre. It's possible that it sounds cool in its native language, as I'm only going off a translated version of the game. By the way, thank you ROM hacking community. Especially you, Neek DC, because beforehand we didn't really have any way to play this game in English, so thank you so much for your contribution to the Mega Man community. We really appreciate you. With that being said, my criticisms of the story is specific to the English translated version of said game. Even though it's a fan-made ROM patch, it's only specific to this version of the game. Because I know there are some people out there who'll be like, you should learn Japanese because the script is so much better in the native language. No, I've heard that excuse whenever people would defend Sonic Adventure 2 from detractors whenever said detractors would laugh at the line delivery of the game. Because whether the Japanese script is better or not is completely irrelevant to a review of the English version of said game, so don't try to use that excuse with me because it'll ultimately get you nowhere. This game takes place in Symphony City, which is a place where robots and humans coexist. It's basically an optimistic paradise, but then the evil Mega Man Shadow and his robot masters called the Dimensions, they wreak havoc on the city. Sparring rivals Mega Man and Bass vowed to put their differences aside to stop him. I know because of when this was released, Bass was an established rival of Mega Man, so for the 20 of you who don't know who he is, Dr. Wily built a secondary antagonist / anti-hero named Bass, who was first introduced in Mega Man 7 serving as Wily's answer to Mega Man, and continued to be Mega Man's rival in Mega Man 8 until he was given anti-hero status in the following Super Famicom title Mega Man and Bass. Bass becomes the new Proto Man of the series, although unlike Proto Man, he remains strictly loyal to Dr. Wily despite the 2 instances he goes against him in and Bass as well as Mega Man 10. And Mega Man the Power Fighters 2 also expands upon this idea. Yeah, he's pretty much the Shadow the Hedgehog to Mega Man Sonic in terms of being an edgy antagonist when introduced, turned anti-hero when he shows signs of rebellion against the mad scientist he works for. He also became a fan favorite, not to the extent that Shadow did for the Sonic fanbase, but he has a dedicated following enough. but you can get this idea when Base remarks how there's two Mega Mans, meaning he can destroy them both, but his primary interest is in saving Dr. Wily's lab rather than engaging the original Mega Man, allowing the two to have a ceasefire, and each campaign has slight variations of the story, probably accounting for differing perspectives and different reactions from the main characters, Mega Man being the more virtuous of the two, and Base being the more ruthless and self-interested. But I feel from a gameplay standpoint that there's not a whole lot of reason for Base to be in this game at all. For one, this feels more like a follow-up to the Game Boy games, closing a loose plot thread that has never been quite resolved in Mega Man 2 Game Boy. Because, spoiler alerts, Mega Man Shadow is revealed to be a failed prototype of Quint, and he wanted to be stopped before he could cause any destruction. And he knew either Mega Man or Base could stop him. I mean, I'm glad they're going further with the idea of a corrupted Mega Man from the future. Okay, now the title makes more sense. But not only are his intentions really contradictory, but also for a failed prototype of Quint, he sure puts up more of a fight than Quint ever did, which is explained by him upgrading himself and taking over the world in his time. Oh, speaking of which, one thing I must praise this story for, Dr. Wily is not involved at all. Thank you, game. I was half expecting Dr. Wily to be all like,
"Surprise, surprise! I am the true bait-and-switch villain for the millionth time! It was I who was controlling Mega Man Shadow all along!"
But no, as soon as Mega Man Shadow is killed, the final cutscene is shown and the credits roll. But other than that, the story had potential in the beginning, but squandered it with an unearned sad death scene. Like, sorry game, while I like the connection to Quint, which doesn't have much weight in a self-contained vacuum, I'm not given a reason to care about Mega Man Shadow otherwise. Sure, he appears in like 3 cutscenes, begging the question as to why Mega Man or Base can't just kill him right then and right there before entering the stage. That's what I would do if I met my evil counterpart from the future. Hold it right there, Psyquestian gentlemen. Don't move. My name is Time Attack. I'm not with the Skull Force, but let's just say after they try to execute you, you pretty much go on a rampage that wasn't within your control, but it pretty much devastates the entire multiversal quadrant you're in, so to stop you, which will stop future me, will save millions of lives in your timeline. It's too late for my old timeline because we operate on time. Oh, God! What have you done? Cool story. Tell it to Reader's Digest. While I understand wanting to give him a presence to progress the story more, Mega Man 5 Game Boy did this way better on inferior hardware. Having them stand around and talk without any action going on whatsoever is extremely lazy, especially given the dialogue from Mega Man Shadow doesn't get remotely interesting until the second to last cutscene, only when explaining the loose plot thread of Quint. Not to mention that as the game's antagonist, Mega Man Shadow simply doesn't have the love-to-hate quality that Dr. Wily has, or even the menacing quality of Mega Man X's Sigma. He doesn't have any charisma whatsoever, and he doesn't do anything that commands my attention. I also find the story presentation itself to be an immense downgrade from not just the console games, but also the handheld games, especially the handheld games, whereas there's no cool animations for the cutscenes. Like for example, the attack on Symphony City is comprised of a text scroll on a background image, and the story is just images that fade in and fade out, which feels incredibly lazy, especially considering how much more powerful the WonderSwan is compared to the Game Boy. And that's not the only aspect that was downgraded from the previous handheld games on the Game Boy. No, the gameplay itself is also pretty downgraded. As seen in the intro cutscene, there are only 6 or 7 Robot Masters, meaning you'll only get 5 additional weapons, with 2 of the Robot Masters serving as a double threat stage boss. And while I get that they tried to go for a tree system of level selection that Base went for, it is way too simple for its own good, because after the intro stage, you get to select one of 4 Robot Masters and figure out which route to go into. And while the original Mega Man Base added a new Robot Master stage unlocked depending on which one you took out first, the Clockman stage isn't unlocked until all 4 Robot Masters are defeated, and Compass Man isn't unlocked until the Clockmen are defeated, meaning that they might as well be Fortress stage bosses at this point. It's kind of a bastardization of Mega Man's tried and true level progression, and it's a real shame it didn't go for more of a progression tree akin to the original Mega Man and Base. I know some might say this completely removes the non-linearity as shown in Mega Man 2 through 6 NES, where you could choose 8 levels at the start, but I dare say that the progression tree, as seen in Mega Man Base, has its own benefits to it. You see, sure, the first level you have to play through, but after that it just splits and splits, and you have some open-endedness as to where to go next after that. But it also gradually increases the difficulty curve as the further you go down, the more the game expects you to have weapons already to play around with, so it can naturally make these levels harder without overwhelming the player who would do a buster-only run on these levels, say if they were all open-ended at the start. So, I think this honestly works better than even the 4x4 method of level progression as seen in Mega Man 2, Game Boy, and beyond.
You can't possibly be serious. It's objectively worse.
As serious as high cholesterol levels. I would know. So between the Robot Master stages, the intro stage, and the final one, there's only like 8 levels in the entire game, which is less than the usual 8 Robot Master stages and 4 to 7 Fortress stages, and while none of them are unplayable, they tend to drift between annoying to meh. There's literally nothing here that other Mega Man games haven't done a lot better. For one, the enemy types that would usually consist of Met tools now have this large variant that jumps up and down with a very small window to strike, downright affecting the pacing of the level design because each level is chock full of these little bastards. And sometimes they're just placed in the most god-awful locations, like the upward exit in Aircon Man stage for example. It is possible to get past it as base, but as Mega Man, you better jump preemptively, otherwise forget about it. Take the alternate exit. The rest of the enemies are standard Mega Man fare, with the floating enemies that threaten knockback damage into a bottomless pit, but there are also very low HP enemies, so they're not much of a big deal. There's also really cool stage-specific enemies like the panels in the Clockman stage that have a specific window of vulnerability in accordance with their position, and these bubble enemies that threaten to trap you in its goo if touched are quite a unique idea. I like that these enemies are completely original, only borrowing from common Mega Man enemy types occasionally, like this annoying bat in Aircon Man stage. God, this stage just has everything going against it. But I do find it weird that if you kill an enemy, their projectiles completely disappear. I am aware that the Mega Man series is not where you go for realism, as if you destroy a country that launched a nuclear device at you, it's not like it'll boop out of existence, but ever since the first Mega Man game, projectiles would stay on screen even if the enemy dies, encouraging players to think about when to dodge the attack and when to fire. With the projectiles now disappearing, all I have to do is spam shots at the enemies, not worrying if an incoming projectile would hit me eventually. So, it feels like a case of lazy programming from a developer that doesn't really understand the nuances and subtleties of Mega Man enemy design, and I wish that was the only thing that they didn't understand because the stages themselves can be a bit uninspired and messy. And you would think that the issue with fitting these larger enemies in a small cramped space would mean base would be the better option, but sometimes that's simply not the case. I mean, sure, diagonal aiming is nice, as well as the double jump making these annoying Met tools out in the open no longer an issue, not to mention that the levels are a lot easier to traverse compared to Mega Man, but the lack of a charge means these bullet sponge ladybugs are going to be a little more annoying than usual, so pick your poison between the two playstyles because there's quite a large amount of bullet sponge enemies in this game. And as for the level gimmicks besides the enemy types included, there's not really much here that wasn't done better in other games previously. While some of my favorite Mega Man games are very derivative of reusing level themes, the reuse of level themes isn't inherently a problem, as there's a difference between playing Burner Man's Forest Fire stage obstacle section in Mega Man and Base versus playing the entirety of Torchman's hectic instant kill fire from Mega Man 11, which encourages the use of the double gear gimmick. Sure, they're very similar obstacles being fire based, but how you go about them is completely different as opposed to being similar yet worse. Games like Mega Man 5 Game Boy show how they can pull it off with Jupiter Stage having a similar anti-gravity gimmick as Starman from Mega Man 5 NES, but change up enemy and obstacle placement. But even from the first level, the game is derivative to a not so original point, whereas the entire level takes place in a cave. Sure, it's designed alright, introducing the spikes you have to slide under or avoid depending on if you were playing as Mega Man or Base, with the latter lacking a slide needed for the lower hanging spikes, and I applaud this level for at least tutorializing the differences in the playstyle without text prompts or anything, just letting the stage hazards speak for themselves basically. But this level is not at all interesting, even for a tutorial level, and it's sadly one of the better levels in this game, because Bullet Man and Conroe Man stages are just plain old platforming stages with some bombless pits and no boss specific hazards other than the specific enemy types introduced in those levels. And Camoso Man stage is annoyingly stop and go with these frustrating enemy types, but by far the most annoying stage in this game has to go to Aircon Man. And I know that with the WonderSwan handheld, it's not much of a big deal to flip it and play it vertically thanks to its 2 directional paths, making the inverted controls easy to grasp. But playing this game the only way us non-WonderSwan owners would play it, well, let's just say I feel really bad for desktop users because this takes some getting used to, which I did since I was playing it on a laptop and will not fault the game for doing this, even if it is for one level. And I can see why the additional Y-axis space is needed for this specific instant kill spike balloon section, otherwise you'd be running into spikes blind, which is a worse alternative. But that's the thing, between the long length of it and the irritating balloon enemy segment where you have to avoid this freaking bad, often having to switch weapons to get rid of it, and a route that has the worst placed met tool for Mega Man where it's actually near impossible to pass as Mega Man unless you jump preemptively. As I previously established, this level is my least favorite in the entire game and one of my least favorite stages in the entire classic series, especially for the instant kill spike section with the annoying hitboxes. Oh, piece of shit. I hate this level. Sure, I wouldn't call it Cutman stage from Wily's Revenge levels of bad. No, I think it's even worse. Yeah, I said it. I never thought I'd say that, but here I am, saying it. Thankfully, the rest of the stages are fine. The Clockman stage brings back the reverse gravity gimmick of Gravity Man stage from Mega Man 5 NES, albeit not as well handled as that stage due to the indicators of the gravity switching, which isn't as clear as it should be, since they're now faint arrows as opposed to the flashing electronic arrows from 5 NES. I also noticed how there's multiple paths for Mega Man and Bass, with Bass having the longer, more annoying path, proving how this game feels better suited for Mega Man than even Bass, with Bass's playthrough being the afterthought of the two. The original game had a similar design mindset where certain areas are only accessible by Mega Man or Bass, depending on their abilities, but it never outright punishes the player for choosing one or the other than not being able to reach those CDs you see lying around in those levels. And some bosses are way harder on the others campaign, but that's really about it in terms of differences. And I honestly don't consider one playstyle technically worse than the other. I prefer Mega Man, but mainly because I'm more used to playing as Mega Man in these games. Here, this is just dumb, and there's no reason for it, especially because for Mega Man's path, should he choose to take the shortcut, he can get to the same point in only just a few screens. Really? Just why? I'm sure it's more level for like Bass's playthrough, but come on! Who is responsible for greenlighting this very long pathway to the same exact point?
If you only knew who hired the Tempest Fugit organization to stop the development of that game. That's what you get for getting me fired over $20, you ass. This concludes my villain arc for this season.
And Compass Man as well as Mega Man Shadow stages are a decent steady increase in the difficulty curve, now expecting us to use all of the acquired weapons, even if it's not necessarily required, but just applying what we know to these enemy gauntlets of familiar enemies will never not be the high point of the game. But despite these instances of thoughtful, gimmicky yet clever level design, most of it is tried and true to the point where it just blurs together in memory, with the exception of Aircon Man and Clockman stages. At the very least, the mini-bosses and regular boss battles are interesting on a conceptual basis, but they're kind of ruined by one fatal flaw, and that being the invulnerability frames being way too generous to the player. The mini-bosses in most of these stages have some really unique concepts. I mean, the lasers where you have to jump on and off of the platforms to avoid laser fire can be really annoying because of how long it takes for the Bullet Sponge mini-boss to go down, with the default buster at least. But you also get some really cool ones like this tank mini-boss that has multiple parts to it that you have to watch out for. And my favorite has to be this upside down mini-boss that spawns floating enemies that don't really spawn again until they are defeated, causing the mini-boss to lower its weak point to spawn more. Sure, it's easier with the other weapons, but I just find this so cool that it counts on pattern recognition in a rather creative way. I also really like this octopus mini-boss that uses a previously established rule with met tool enemies in a creative way to take out the boss, because you know how the Mettool's helmets deflect the buster shots upwards in a diagonal pattern? Well, now this common player frustration is subverted to be the ultimate advantage in this mini-boss, as the shots deflect back to the boss, but you also have to time the platforms to get the shots into it, or you can just use the other weapons. That's the thing about these mini-bosses that feel so fresh. They actually try to be more than annoying bullet sponges that spawn the same attack over and over. They actively try to teach the player how to creatively take them down, and while this theory of mini-boss design isn't exactly new to the franchise, it's still fascinating how it was implemented nonetheless. The actual boss battles are pretty similar, except the fatal flaw that I mentioned previously really ruins and squanders the potential that they had. The boss battles are interesting once you get past the annoying starting Grey Devil boss fight that just shoots jelly and slime back and forth. It doesn't even dismantle his body apart like most of the devil type bosses do. It's especially annoying fighting him with base's default buster that barely deals damage, not to mention if you move just left or right on the middle tile of the floor, the fear of the gels hitting you is completely alleviated. But after that crap is over with, I have to give credit where credit is due for the rest of the bosses. For a bunch of weird Robot Master designs, some of these guys actually have some interesting attack patterns that make the most of Mega Man and Base's moveset, not just in terms of combat but also platforming, almost as if they're a combination of a Robot Master and a Fortress boss battle rolled into one. At least for the latter ones like Compass Man and his two separate moving parts, and the Clockman brothers. Even Aircon Man has this element to him. Not bad for an Airman ripoff. In fact, the one thing I will praise about these bosses are the really cool attack patterns from the first 4 Robot Masters, from Bullet Man's bullet attack to Aircon Man's use of rocks that encourage platforming from the player, but also double as potential crush damage, to Conroe Man's descending flame attack and flame pillars. Hell, even Kumuso Man has a really cool clone attack that's tricky to dodge thanks to having a copy attack that has him divide into 3, with 2 of the copies being impervious to damage, and the multiple ways this is utilized makes for a challenging boss battle you won't forget. Although, when the level progression gets linear with the last 3 stages, the bosses don't gradually increase the challenge curve as much as they should. Like the Clockmen are quite aggressive with their side swipe attacks and BS RNG lightning attack, making them tricky, but not as hard as Kumuso Man. And then there's Compass Man, who has 2 moving parts which can be a bit overwhelming when the top and the legs converge onto you, and their sprites are a bit too large to jump over successfully without damage, but with their weakness as base, they are extremely easy. And you would think that the ultimate showdown with Mega Man Shadow would be the most climactic, most challenging boss in the game, right? I mean, if you want to take over the world or even end the world, why not, you know? You just do it with a giant doomsday device, not with a freaking rip-off Z-Saber, a pogo stick, and a pea shooter, like, come on. Oh, shit. To be fair, he does put up way more of a fight than Quint ever did, and he has a large health bar, which doesn't mean a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. I do appreciate how aggressive he is with his relentless use of the knife attack, pogo stick, and use of projectiles, but this, as well as the pathetically easy intro boss with the Grey Devil, just showcases how it doesn't really matter what patterns they come up with, if it weren't for one glaring flaw that outright ruins these boss battles: the invincibility frames. They are way too generous in this game. Like, look how many hits I can get in at one time. And while they do protect the boss during certain animations they perform, it doesn't matter whether you're using the default weapon or their weakness against them, because their health will just melt away, especially when using their weakness against them, leading to a really unpolished set of bosses, unfortunately. But at the very least, the weapons acquired from the Fallen Dimensions, as they're called in this game, they're not the best weapons overall, but I found some practical use out of some of them. Because of the challenging and occasionally frustrating at times nature of this game, I did find myself using all these weapons at one point, and thankfully, they are passable for the most part. They don't have any high highs, nor reach abysmally low lows, save one rendition of the 5 weapons. They consume just as much energy as needed, no more or less, and none of them feel outright overpowered, unless you buy the energy reducer, which means for the most part they are ideally balanced, meaning the last question remains: are they fun to use? Well, they won't save the world from ending, but at the very least they made this game a lot less exhausting as soon as I took down the first real boss after the Grey Devil. I do like how this game kind of follows Mega Man 5 Game Boy's example and actually shows the player how to use said weapon after defeating a robot master and gaining their weapon, so they don't miss out on any hidden abilities of said weapon, like whether it should be charged or not, and even includes enemies to show exactly how to use it against them. So when it comes to tutorializing the player, this game passes with flying colors, and because the game features both Mega Man and Bass's playable characters, there are many differences between their weapons, despite similar names. Mega/Bass Vulcan, for example, Mega Man shoots out 3 needles that can be great for crowd control against lesser enemies, even though 2 move diagonally and 1 moves straight forward. Bass, on the other hand, can shoot out just 1 needle, however, it does home in on a nearby enemy. This weapon's alright in both instances, even if I found more use out of it as Mega Man than I did Bass, since there was never really a lot of low HP enemies it can instant kill, but I never use it for high HP enemies unless there was a boss weak to it. Flame Shower and Flame Mixer are both some of my most used weapons in both playthroughs. Mega Man's version, if held, can be used to singe enemies, and releasing the hold would have it go upwards, which really helps out with airborne enemies and especially mini-bosses. Bass's Flame Mixer is even better because while it has the hold and release aspect in common with Mega Man's version, Bass's version has an exception because when held, the flames actually form a shield for as long as it's held, and when released, it actually goes upwards. This I use a lot throughout the game and is probably one of my favorite shield weapons since it has good offensive capabilities against even higher HP enemies. And the last of the diverging weapons is the Doppel Crash for Mega Man and Doppel Attack for Bass. These are honestly night and day in terms of differences and quality because it can all be summed up as Mega Man's Doppel Crash sucks, while Bass's Doppel Attack is great, albeit extremely overpowered even without the energy reducer upgrade. The Doppel Crash outright sucks because when you hold it, there's no visual feedback to show if it's ready to be used, so you just have to time it right and hope that the weird large boss hitboxes don't screw you over. Definitely the worst weapon in the game, which is strange because Bass's Doppel Attack has him turn into 4 mini Basses and they float around to wherever you like. He's basically like a cursor that causes damage to whatever it touches, including enemy hitboxes, and it just either instant kills lower HP enemies or drains away the health of bosses like Compass Man and even the final boss being Mega Man Shadow. It is extremely overpowered, and if you use this having bought the energy reducer for 150 bullets, then you're pretty much a demonic god for the rest of the game. And as for the remaining 2 weapons, they're pretty much identical in terms of function despite the different names for Mega Man and Bass's variations. Barrier Wind/Cyclone is a great offensive weapon since the rate of fire is moderate, the energy consumption is moderate, and the damage dealt is pretty decent. It also has the ability to destroy these walls that house helpful items, so I have no complaints here other than the ability to destroy the walls should have been available with a Doppel Crash/Double Attack to at least give that weapon some utilitarian value. Because Barrier Wind/Cyclone is good enough as it is, so destroying these walls is just a major plus. And the Time Switch/Bomb pauses time akin to the Time Stopper from Mega Man 4 NES. It's okay, albeit extremely situational since by the time you get it, there's only really a use for it on the final level to stop the sinking platform and jump off the midair spat out rocks from these enemies. It's not the best weapon, but it's far from the worst. So there's not really any high highs, but I did enjoy this game's fire and wind weapon. However, I did notice I had way more fun with Bass's rendition of the weapons than I did Mega Man's, and I believe that was more of an effort to balance out the playstyles, given that Bass's Buster weapon cannot be charged and even when fully upgraded, pales in comparison to Mega Man's chargeable Mega Buster, which was carried over from the original Mega Man and Bass, and definitely why I preferred Mega Man's campaign over Bass's. Even though many insist that Bass is the more fun playstyle, but different strokes for different folks. I prefer my Charge Buster, thank you very much. With Bass's playthrough, it's like, sure, you can shoot in multiple directions, but Bass's combat encounters are noticeably not as fun as Mega Man's, when you just have his Buster alone without the upgrades. But even after paying 600 bolts to get both upgrades to Bass's Buster, the combat scenarios are more fun, but only slightly more fun instead of exponentially more fun. Expensive, isn't it? Well, that's actually fairly priced for a permanent upgrade at the very least, but the rest of the shop, I can't really say the same for, because it's mostly bullshit with how these one-use items are priced. Yep, The shop system introduced in 4 Game Boy returns here, although it seems to have adopted 7 and Base's bolt system in place of the P-chips, which is fine. I like the bolts better than the P-chips anyways. I just feel bad for the investors who put all their eggs in the P-chip basket.
I'm sorry, how much did the value of P-chips go down? 100%? How is that possible?
And minor nitpick, but why is Roll and Dr. Light helping Base despite not being affiliated with him? I would think that Base has his own shop run by Proto Man since we see him in the game and he'd be empathetic to Base as a former lieutenant of Dr. Wily. Mega Man 10 later had the right idea of having a shop run by Reggae at least. Anyways, this shop will clean out your life savings faster than an ex-spouse after a divorce, because normal items like 1-ups and weapon energy refills that are one use only cost as much if not more than some of the permanent items. Like, is it really necessary to charge 200 bolts for a one-use 1-up or Tango the Cat? For perspective, the energy reducer and energy balancer are 150 bolts each, and they stick with you for the rest of the game. And that's not even the most expensive one-use item. Beat the Bird, remember him? Well, he's a whopping 300 bolts just to use him for a few seconds in one of the levels. That's bullshit. Maybe with Rush, who is 100 bolts, as well as Tango and Beat, they were probably intended to be permanent items as it would only be fair for all the bolts I had to turn over. But yeah, Rush, who has been a permanent item since his inception in Mega Man 3 NES, is a one-use item. Who the f thought it was a great idea to make them all one use? They should have referenced the console games already out as to how to design a shop system, especially Mega Man Base, because this is supposed to be a sequel to that experience. And it really doesn't help matters that there's not a lot of good opportunities to get bolts in the first place, making the shop system even more frustrating than it has to be. If these items were going to be priced that high, then they should either A, make their utilitarian purpose better than it is now, or B, make them permanent upgrades as I've been saying before. Because if you play this game regularly, not all levels have a Super Bolt, and even with one Super Bolt, you'll on average get 30 to 50 bolts per level. Now, guess how many playable levels are in this game? 8. But the final level doesn't save your bolt count because you beat it. So, you have 7 levels to get as many bolts as you can. And because the mini bolts and super bolts are random drops from enemies, guess what I had to do? Grind for bolts, especially for Base's playthrough since I wanted the additional buster upgrades like shooting through walls and increased damage output, each costing 300 bolts mind you. But with those upgrades, they're permanent so it's a fair price. I have no problem with how these 2 shop items were handled at least, but for such a short game, you're not going to have a lot of opportunities to make bank, so my advice is to get the energy reducer first. Everything else is second fiddle. And do you want to know what the biggest kick in the nuts and bolts is? Well, for the amount you pay for some of these one-use items, some of them are outright useless. Eddie and Reggae serve similar roles in giving you a helpful item, but still too much for 150 bolts for a one-use item. Like great, I just got paid 150 bolts from playing through those 4 levels in the game, and instead of getting something useful like an energy reducer or balancer, I got a temporary health item. Yay! This 300 bolt weapon refill, by the way, it's nice, but worth only 50 to 80 bolts to refill all weapons, and 300 bolts is just overcharging it, for one use mind you. And despite Treble the Dog being 200 bolts, this one use item does make me feel like a demon god when equipping it as base. However, like the others, it's a temporary item, and that's the real problem here. A lot of these helper animal bots used to run on their own weapon energy rather than be a temporary item, but they have some arbitrary timer before they disappear, and you bet it's never enough time. If you want a useful one-use item that's affordable, look no further than the Spike Guard since it's only 20 bolts, and you can use it for that god-awful Aircon Man spike section. I just wish you could buy several of them. Haha! I beat the suggestion type comments at their own game. Of course I use the Spike Guard for that spike section in Aircon Man stage. After you use the first one, you better not die, otherwise you have to do that entire section legitimately. So, yeah, don't leave that suggestion. I'm fully aware of the Spike Guard's function in that stage, and it doesn't work as well as it should. Last but not least, want to know what is the most useless type of one-use item? The Party Ball. For 50 bolts, at least it's cheap, you can summon this party ball. So I did. And absolutely nothing happened. No helpful items randomly generated, no increase in bolt distribution from defeated enemies, not even some chiptune kazoos with confetti sprites. The rest of the items are self-explanatory, like the damage shield and the health pickup upgrade, but regardless, this is easily the worst shop system in the entire classic series. There is absolutely no excuse for it. So that is Mega Man and Bass Challenger from the Future's gameplay. What a hodgepodge of decent ideas to terrible ideas to give this really mixed bag of an experience. When it comes to judging whether this is a good game or bad game in a vacuum, it's not a simple answer. I do, however, believe that this is the Mega Man game that Mega Man 2 Game Boy detractors make out Mega Man 2 Game Boy to be like. But as flawed as that game is, it at the very least was true to the core of classic Mega Man, with most of its flaws being from their source material. This game's flaws, however, comes from having poorly executed new ideas and programming, mostly with invincibility frames and other weird janky issues. The graphics, for example, leave a lot to be desired because while Mega Man and the enemies look fine in some instances, sprites such as Rush look worse than final boss Dr. Wily from Mega Man 2 Game Boy, where he's just squished into that cockpit. And the animation is incredibly stiff. A typical Mega Man game has a running animation and a jumping animation that gives him a sense of lightweight, but here, he's just walking and pointing his cannon. There's not a whole lot of depth to his animations, and with that being the main series of animations you'll see throughout the game, it kind of doesn't feel as exciting without that carefree attitude of the original NES game's animations. And here, they couldn't even replicate the Mega Man and Bass smooth running animations and settled for this zombie robot walking animation cycle when the WonderSwan is capable of doing so. And last but not least, the music for this game. And let me just say, I actually kind of like it. Hear me out. The original Mega Man and Bass had a very stellar 16-bit soundtrack using a mix of electronic and MIDI instrument samples to convey an upbeat, futuristic sound to go with not just the fast-paced action on screen, but also serves to complement the stage themes themselves. Now, take all the best tracks from Mega Man and Bass and adapt them for a more primitive chiptune style. Well, that's what you get with Challenger from the Future soundtrack, starting with the title screen. God, that hurts my ears. Not only does this game's entire soundtrack completely adapt the original Mega Man and Bass soundtrack with not a whole lot to call its own, the tracks are sometimes placed in level themes that weren't originally meant for them. Like with Aircon Man's stage, you might want something like Tengu Man's track, but instead we get Cold Man's theme for some reason. Okay, I mean, that's scientifically accurate, I suppose, because the higher altitude you are, the colder it is. Meanwhile, Tengu Man's track was adapted in Kumusu Man's stage. I will say though, sometimes the adaptations are more successful in some instances, like how Ground Man's theme was adapted for Bullet Man's stage. It has a computerized sound suiting the factory setting for this level, and I honestly like this way better than the original Ground Man's theme, because the chiptune arrangement suits the composition better than the MIDI instrument and electronic samples used in the original. And the sci-fi inspired Astro Man theme from the original game honestly works perfectly when adapted for the Clockman stage. It sounds way better in chiptune form with the faint backing melody now a lot more audible, so it doesn't just sound like intermittent beeps with drum samples on a short loop. And the ominous sound to it just suits the atmosphere of the stage way better as well. And you bet I had a Cheshire Cat grin when hearing how my favorite stage track for Mega Man and Bass, being Pirate Man, was brought over to no other than Compass Man stage, going for more of a technological emphasis with the chiptune instrumentation. And of course, Mega Man Shadow stage has the King stage theme, and it sounds just as good in chiptune form as it did in the original game. Depending on my mood, most times I don't really prefer one over the other. And that ending theme does convey a deep sadness, contextualizing how it affects Mega Man emotionally. And this piece works a lot better in this context than it did in the original, whereas it served as a theme for the bio cards for the Robot Masters and other robots in the Mega Man universe that you unlock from collected CDs in the stages. So while the soundtrack leaves a very negative first impression, rest assured, the remainder of the soundtrack is pretty solid, and while compositionally Mega Man & Bass was never my favorite classic series soundtrack, it at the very least does it justice. And with all that said, overall, Mega Man & Bass Challenger from the Future is a mediocre game.
Well, I could have told you that. Mega Man and Bass is an objectively terrible video game that fails to understand the game design and broad appeal of Mega Man. Sure, there are defenders of Mega Man and Bass, but we all know they're just coping.
But you do know I'm not even talking about the original Mega Man and Bass for the Super Famicom. I actually like that game quite a bit.
Wait, you're talking about the WonderSwan game? There was a WonderSwan game? Well, I guess I'll sign off then. Until the actual Mega Man and Bass review, I'll see you next time. Take care, SideQuest Gamer.
Hey, dumbass! I'm not SideQuest Gamer anymore. I'm SideQuestian Gentleman. Get with the program. Everyone else did these past 2 years.
Ha! Don't care.
Oh, I hate that guy. I can't say that I like this game all that much, but with only one god-awful level and the rest being consistently meh to decent, I was surprised at how a ROM hack looking game held up in the end. And while it's held together by tape and Elmer's glue, thanks to an unbalanced shop system and half the weapons being pointless, it could have been a whole lot worse. It definitely doesn't hold a candle to the original Mega Man and Bass, which I plan to cover next season, but in a vacuum, it's not completely irredeemable, but it does fail to deliver a compelling Mega Man experience. Even though I'm still not a fan of the Mega Man on NES, at least in that game when I kill an enemy, their projectile still poses a risk, and the more open and spacious level design, while boring at times, at least gave me a sense of accomplishment. And just looking back at the classic Mega Man games I've covered, it's pretty surprising just how this is one of the few classic Mega Man games I can honestly call mediocre or worse. This handheld retrospective, while it has went on for a really long time, beginning in late 2018, has finally come to a close in mid-2022. It's been pretty interesting seeing how the Blue Bomber held up on handhelds, and generally, Capcom's Minakuchi engineering had the best idea of how to make a handheld Mega Man game loyal to the original console experience despite the lower screen resolution and less screen real estate, but they still understood Mega Man better than the other developers in the 90s who tried to attempt the same thing, and Minakuchi engineering seemed to pave the way for handheld installments for other game series in the Mega Man franchise, with the 2 Extreme games on Game Boy Color developed by in-house Capcom, as well as the beloved Mega Man Zero Quadrilogy for Game Boy Advance and ZX Duology developed by Inti Creates. So while it would have been really easy to make an hour-long video summarizing the classic Mega Man Game Boy games and other related 90s handheld titles, I feel like that wouldn't quite do them justice, because classic Mega Man walked on the Game Boy so X and Zero could run on later portable handhelds, just like how he did on home consoles. With that said, this handheld retrospective has finally come to a close. Incoming message from Jay's Reviews.
Whoa, Alec. Sorry not sorry for interrupting, but isn't there a classic Mega Man we're forgetting to talk about?
Mega Man powered up for the PSP? I'll get to that eventually.
Now not just that, I'm also talking about Mega Man and Bass on Game Boy Advance. Clearly you wouldn't have forgotten that handheld spin-off, am I right?
That's true. I don't really see any faults in that logic. It's pretty airtight all around. How am I going to proceed?
And I suppose congratulations are in order for 150 reviews.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot. I think I know a way to cover address the exclusion of said games in the handheld retrospective. Thank you so much, Jay.
Why, thank you, for you were clearly a better man than I, for I am too self-centered to ever utter the phrase myself. Now I'll leave the rest to you.
Classic Mega Man's journey on the handheld didn't just end in the 90s either, as Mega Man and Bass finally got released 5 years later in 2003 for the Game Boy Advance, meaning the colors are brighter, the screen space is significantly less, but surprisingly still functional. Don't worry, I'll cover that next season as it would make more sense to review it after the original game. And as for Mega Man Powered Up, the critically acclaimed remake of Mega Man 1 for the PSP, released in 2006, I have plans for that much later down the line when talking about Mega Man in the 6th console generation. So overall, this handheld retrospective isn't really all-inclusive, but rather a look at the 90s output of the handheld side of classic Mega Man. The end result I felt was worth it. After 8 years on this online platform, it feels like a major accomplishment to still be going, and despite still being a Z-list YouTuber, it's nonetheless exciting to have an idea and bring that idea to life. To even have these long-term projects finally reach their end so I can begin the next one. I've learned a lot from all of you, what exactly you want from this channel, and most importantly how to write a video script. Between 2018 and 2022, I hope you'd notice a significant increase in quality in the scripting. But regardless, thank you all so much for watching, especially to those who have been around since this channel's early years and still stick around for the long haul. 150 reviews down and many more to go. Because if the apocalyptic crisis of COVID-19 didn't stop me, I frankly don't know what will. God damn it, I promised I wouldn't get all sentimental. So, this world's coming to an end. Thank you so much for watching the 150th review special, that means a lot. And until the season 6 finale video comes out, remember to stay awesome. Now let's see if I can warp out before we reach the event horizon. Warping to unknown safe house. Freeze! Psyquestian gentlemen, you are under arrest by the Skull Force of the Psyquestian Empire. Great. Looks like you guys finally caught up to me. You have the right to remain silent, and of course call an attorney if you should choose. I really recommend you get a good lawyer. Oh, believe me, I know a really good lawyer.